Welcome to this exciting series of lessons entitled The Transforming System. Jack Boland has literally changed the lives of thousands of people, and he can help you change yours. These lessons are designed to give you the information and inspiration you need to make your life what it can be. And now, Jack Boland.
Once upon a time. That's a good way to start that story, isn't it? Once upon a time. Once upon a time, I had an experience that changed my life. I had been living in a world of darkness and loneliness, despair. And yet, I was the only one, I believed, who knew how I felt. There was a part of me that could not admit, even to myself, the hopelessness that I was experiencing in my heart. And so I had a facade. I smiled a lot, and yet there were times when I would be in the midst of a large group of people and make an excuse and walk out of the room and sob. Return to that room. Smile again. I'm sure that every one of you understands exactly what I am talking about. And when I was in that place in my life, it seemed to me that what I was experiencing was the only way that life was. If life was better than I was experiencing it, then surely I would know it. Because after all, was I not the smartest one of us? Of course I was. Have you noticed that on any given day or period or long season in your life that it appears to you that the way it is the only way that it's going to be? There's a tendency for us to identify with how things are at any given moment. And it is virtually impossible for us to not be identified with what we think and feel, because we are absolutely certain that what we think and feel is true. And if there is another truth, then surely it only measures by some slight margin above or beyond where we are. That, oh yes, we can conceive there might be more, but not much more. And so, with this thought in mind, I would like to read to you a statement by William James, who was a psychologist who lived at the turn of the century and had a great impact upon the thinking of this new world. He said, one conclusion was forced upon my mind at the time, and the time he was referring to was a special event that happened inside him, a subjective experience that was defined by him as a religious or a spiritual experience in which his whole belief system was transformed suddenly in a sharply etched, dramatic way. He experienced some things that he had not conceived being possible. And he said, and my impression of its truth has ever since remained unshaken. It is that our normal consciousness, rational consciousness as we call it, is but one special type of consciousness, whilst all about it, parted from it by the flimsiest of screens, there lie potential forms of consciousness entirely different. William James was changed by the impact of consciousness that was greater than that which he had experienced and believed to be the truth. You know that there are literally thousands of similar reports from men and women, just like you and me, who have been transformed by something greater than themselves, and yet the something was within themselves. So this experience is not so unusual as to not be reported regularly. And when this experience occurs, the person who is touched by it is never again the same. Their whole belief system of the past is shattered, and they are changed, dramatically changed, inside themselves and in ways that are visible to other persons, and more than just the fact that they are changed, in that moment and from that moment forward, everything for them and around them also transformed. It is absolutely remarkable. The thing probably that is the most astonishing about this experience is that so few people know about it or seek it or even anticipate it in their lives. And the reason I say this is so remarkable is because this was religion's responsibility to teach us. It is religion's mandate to tell us about ourselves and to help us into this experience that is predicted and promised for all persons. This is the good news that the Scriptures report. James said, looking back on my own experiences, they all converge towards a kind of insight to which I cannot help recording some metaphysical significance. The keynote of it is invariably reconciliation. It is as if the opposites of the world, whose contradictoriness and conflict made all our difficulties and troubles, were melted into unity. And it's the report of James and the people that I have personally talked to, and of 1,000 reports that I have read, that when this happens to a person, all of the conflicts, the ambiguities, the concerns, they all just melt into nothing. And we know that all is well and always was and ever shall be. It is the pearl of great price. It is the super bonum, the great gift. James went on to say, our entire life is very much dependent upon the faculty of identification. And he explained that statement, the faculty of identification. He said, the part of you that has an incessant urge to be identified with your source, the part of you that reaches toward the sun, like the flower that grows up through the soil and reaches for the light and merges with the light. There's a part of you that reaches beyond itself, but is looking within itself to become one with its origin. Like a child seeking to be picked up in the arms of a parent and to belong to the parent and to be loved by the parent and to love the parent. That's a metaphor. But that part of us, when it has not yet seen or believed that it is one with its Creator, has a tendency to become identified with that which it believes, and that which it sees. And what this means is that as another great philosopher said, you and I do not represent ourselves, we misrepresent ourselves. And the reason that we do is that we have believed that we were only human, and that we were black and white as though that made some difference, or male or female. You know, all those things that you believed about yourself and have become identified with ultimately become the controlling factors in our experience. It's called imprinting. Not too long ago, I was watching a National Geographic television program. It was so interesting to me. I like things about nature, and I'm sure you do too. There's something in us that just loves to see the stars and animals in Africa and fish in the sea and worms and bugs and creepy crawly things. Don't you just love that? Well, this one was about birds, and it was showing how that the whooping crane, one of those big tall birds that were almost extinct. There was one time when there were only 7 of them left, and they began to collect the eggs, a few eggs, and hatch them under artificial conditions. And they were very, very careful. This was one of the most important projects that our scientists have undertaken. And they watched over those whooping cranes, baby birds. And in the beginning they made a terrible mistake. You see, the first thing that a bird sees move after it is hatched from the egg, it believes it is. There's an imprinting. It becomes identified, and it saw people hovering over it, and he thought that those people were its parents. And so it was not a bird, it was a human. And later on, when they were matched with other whooping cranes, they turned away from the whooping cranes and ran toward the human beings. They would not mate with the whooping crane, but they did the little dance when another person walked in. That's a real problem, friends. Well, we do the same thing. When you were born, the first moving thing that you saw was the doctor who held you up and slapped you on your little fanny. And then if you looked around the room, or at some later time, you saw your mama or your daddy, and you said, "Oh, I'm one of those." You began to believe early on that you were a normal human being, now didn't you? And for the rest of your life, you have been identifying with us. And so we have come to believe that we are us. We have become so identified with our own limitations, the ones that we believe that we have had, and because we have believed that we have had them, we have had them. And not only are we identified with our own limitations, we've had certain very important people telling us what we could not do and what we should not do, right? And we believed it. We became identified with it. And in time, our whole psyche is filled with these things that we believe. And that becomes our experience. So, James went on to say some very important things. He said, human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives. And that was one of the most important statements that has ever been made in the 20th century, that you can change your whole world by changing the inner aspects of your mind, by changing the things that you have permitted to imprint themselves upon your mind. It's incredible. This came to me years ago, that experience that I inferred that I had. I saw that that my world, my experience, was nothing more than the result of my belief system. I had believed many things to be factual and true, and my outer world was but a collection of those concepts, and that they could be changed. Listen to this. It comes from the Upanishads, written several thousand years ago. For as one's thinking is, such one becomes. You've heard that in our Old Testament, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. But the Upanishads continue, and it is because of this that thinking should be purified and transformed. For were it centered upon truth as it is now upon things perceptible to the senses, who would not be liberated from his bondage? So simple and yet so important, so powerful. Our thinking should be purified and transformed. Because in the transformation of our thinking, so is our world transformed. Listen to what another great thinker who was considered by many religionists to be an atheist. And the religionists believed Einstein to be an atheist because he did not think of God as they thought of God. Albert Einstein, perhaps the greatest thinker of this or any other century, said, "I assert that the cosmic religious experience is the strongest and the noblest driving force behind scientific research." You see, Einstein did not believe in an anthropomorphic God, a God who was off in some corner of the universe, a giant kind of male person sitting there. Einstein became aware that this is a living cosmos, that there is a force or a power or an intelligence in it that knows all things, that it knows what it is, and not only knows what it is, but knows how to convey that information into the mind and heart of a person who will be identified with it, who will seek a relationship. He said, what a deep faith in the rationality of the structure of the world, and what a longing to understand even a small glimpse of the reason revealed in the world there must have been in Kepler and Newton to enable them to unravel the mechanisms of the heavens in long years of lonely work. And Einstein, in other statements, pointed out that it was not he who did the thinking that he did, but there was something in him or around him that revealed those equations to him. Because he expected it, because he anticipated it, and because he believed it. Our understanding simply will not go very far beyond where we are until we can begin to conceive that there is a master mind, a master consciousness, which might be nothing more than another name for a Holy Spirit. A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. The word master in my dictionary means an original from which copies can be made. A master tape is being made of this talk that I'm giving right now, and the master is merely an original from which copies can be made. So, the master will be kept. Many copies will be made from it. Do you know that you are a microcosm? You are a copy of the original macrocosm. You are a little universe. It's true. You are precisely constructed in the nature and the manner of the larger universe. Not your body form, but the essence of you, the spirit of you. You are a little one, like the great one. A copy. But all of the qualities of the original are in you. And so I want to present now this idea to us that we're not seeking to be transformed on the basis of what we ourselves know or believe, but to become aware that there is a master, original, prototype mind in us that is perfect already. And so our transformation is not becoming more like we are, but becoming more like it is. The thinking is already there. The infinite intelligence already exists in us. And not only infinite intelligence, but it has infinite power to implement itself, to present itself to us. You see, the Spirit of life has an incredible urge to reveal itself to the one who seeks it, to the scientist who seeks the truth about some corner, some aspect of the universe, or of some molecule, will find that answer as surely as he seeks it. Seek and you will find was a message that was sent to us thousands of years ago. Seek your true identity and you will find your true identity, but continue to believe that you are what you are, this conglomeration of concepts that have been imprinted upon you, and that's what your experience will be, but it has nothing to do with you. Man is incomplete, like a building not yet finished. As you know, those of us who are gathered here, we are in the process of expanding this wonderful, beautiful facility. The day we moved into it, we'd outgrown it. I surely did not want to believe that. I wanted to close my eyes and cover my ears and pretend that this was all there is, all there ever would be. I was tired of building buildings when we moved into this building. But you know that life is rigged in such a way that we can rest for a while, and whether it be in our spiritual growth or in the world around us, eventually we will be confronted with the fact that it is time to begin again, to change and to grow. And so it is with you and me. And I'm talking about spiritual growth, and I'm talking about the growth of our real selves, the expansion of our real self into the ethers, as it has been said. Certain teachings have always existed in the world which can be called esoteric teachings that are designed to let us know that our completion now depends upon ourselves. Esoteric Christianity, and by esoteric Christianity I mean the Christianity of Jesus. Most Christianity is about Jesus, but the Christianity that he taught tells us that we are evolving beings, that we are in this process of growth and change that will never cease, and that certain things are required by us. One of the oldest written statements ever found is from the Sanskrit, a language that stopped being used almost 5,000 years ago, and said, nature unaided fails, meaning, friends, you've had it. Meaning that life has brought you this far, but if you want to go any farther, then it is necessary that you wake up and shape up, and that you begin to conform to the system that has been presented. When you and I become willing to be changed, then everything that we need to experience that change will be presented to us in the most amazing and remarkable way. We'll be at precisely the right place, at exactly the right time to discover the material in a book or in a cassette lesson or through the voice of a speaker or just through the voice of God speaking in us, to know what we need to do, and we'll be shown how to do it, and we will be empowered. Now, I said when we become willing to be changed. Why do we become willing to be changed? Because we are forced to, through our suffering, through the mistakes that we make. A person who is always cross, cantankerous, difficult, quarrelsome, and even venomous, in time will come to realize that such an emotional state is quite incompatible with self-development. You see, there are things inside our human condition that we cannot take with us where we want to go. Do you think that the thinking of a caterpillar is the thinking of a butterfly? No. And a caterpillar must give up its caterpillar identity in order to become a butterfly. Would you agree? And can you not imagine how a caterpillar resists if it should know that it's about to become a butterfly? It would not want to have that happen to it because it would lose its caterpillar identity. And so it is with we who are so asleep. We do not want to believe that there's anything wrong with us or that we need to be changed. But life is so rigged that in time we will come to make that discovery. And when we become willing to be changed, we discover that each one's task, this process of change, is different. But while the things that you'll be working on in your life will be different from the things that I'll be working on in mine, that the principles are the same and our needs are the same, and the fact that it is necessary for us to support each other is the same. All of us need help. All of us need to experience our source. And it's possible also to come to understand that we can be changed, that our personalities can be, that we can be transformed into persons who don't even resemble beings that we were just a short time before. In my dictionary this morning, I was looking up the word transform to discover that it comes from a Latin word which means to form again or to reform. And that by definition, transform means to markedly change the form or outward appearance of, to change the condition, the nature, or the function of, to convert, to change the personality or the character of. And while I was looking this up in my dictionary, a telephone rang. It was a long-distance call from Poughkeepsie, and the person's name was Mary. I had never met her. She had never met me, except that 4 months ago, when she was moving from Phoenix back to New York, a friend of hers gave her a set of cassette tapes, Techniques for Creative Living. Said, it's a long drive back to the east. Why don't you put these in your car and listen to them on the way home? And Mary was having some difficulties in her life, and she started listening to those tapes and could hardly wait until she got another set. And she said she's been listening to different sets for 4 months. And Mary said, something you need to know, Jack, and that is that I spent several years. I'm 40 years old, and I've been to India. I've sat feet of men who could do marvelous things. I've had my own guru. I've tried every form of religion. And I was looking for that which I sought in some other person or in the world outside myself. And it was not until I started listening to those cassette tapes that I discovered that it could not come to me until I was willing to be changed. I wanted my world to be changed by some external factor or force. But when I became willing to become happy, I was the most miserable person I've ever known. And I had all the reasons for my misery, and you told me that I had to surrender my misery and blame and become 100% responsible for my own life and to let go of these erroneous, negative emotions that had been killing me all of my adult life. And she said, Jack Boland, you're talking to the happiest woman in Poughkeepsie. Maybe in the whole United States. She said, no, wait a minute. I think I'm the happiest woman in the whole world. What a miracle that is. Would you believe that as she was speaking to me, I looked further down in Transform, and it said, implies a change, either in external form or in inner nature and function, so forth. For example, she was transformed into a happy person. She was transformed. She was changed. This afternoon in our class, Mr. Robust was there. There's a young man that I've known for probably 5 years who is here from time to time. He is a powerful, physical specimen. He is strong, and he walks like he is strong. He is a body-building person. He exercises regularly and does it just right. He jogs. He buys his food in the health food store. And so when I saw him this afternoon, hadn't seen him for quite some time. I said, how are you doing? And he said, I'm doing great. I'm having the most wonderful summer of my life. I said, tell me about it. He said, well, it didn't start so good. He said, in June I had a heart attack. He said, it was something that could not happen to me. He said, look at me. I could never have a heart attack because I was working to have the most perfect body possible. And he said, I had a very serious heart attack, and my first reaction to it was anger. He said, I felt that my body had deserted me. I had done all this work for years. And my body had deserted me. And I resented it. God had deserted me. And I was depressed. I felt betrayed. All these ideas that you had been speaking to me, they did not work. He said, then one day, lying in that hospital bed, I remembered something that you said, and you, over and over again, you had said to look for the good in the situation, to not fight it, to agree with it. And my mind did not want to believe that there was any good in this situation. But I had no choice, and I began to look for the good in the situation. And I stopped fighting it. And he said, Jack, I do not have the words to tell you how that suddenly everything began to change. The moment that I tried with all my heart to change my thinking, it was as though a wave of energy, a power greater than myself, seemed to take over. It happened inside me, and everything that I had remembered in the past that was good swept over me. Lots of things that I had never understood before in my life came to me. I rose into a measure of thinking that had been denied me. But I saw that it was I who had denied me these things. It was revealed to me. He said, as my mind opened up, the whole world opened up. And I came to understand that I had never really trusted or believed in God. I had made a god of me and of my body. You shall have no other gods before me. I saw and I felt the presence of God and knew that God was with me, had always been, and that what was happening to me was the best thing that has ever occurred to me. He said, how many times you've said that? And I did not believe it. When I believed it, I was transformed. And he said, the most remarkable thing is that I dealt with my anger for the first time in my life. I saw what an angry person I've always been. He said, by the way, I'm having a quintuple heart bypass surgery next Tuesday. I'm totally unafraid. He said, I know it's going to be just... I said, I've already got the word. He said, the great surgeon in the sky, who's not in the sky at all, that was in me, he said, it's going to be a wonderful experience. He said, and over again, he said, this is the best, most glorious, wonderful summer that I've ever had in my life. Doesn't sound reasonable, does it? No, but the spiritual life is not reasonable. It transcends our reason and brings all things together within us into a wave of understanding and of empowerment. I wonder if this is what happened in an even more magnificent form almost 2,000 years ago when Jesus took Peter and James and John with him into the hills to pray. And I'm reading to you from the 9th chapter of Luke. Into the hills to pray, into the high places in consciousness. Remember that everything in the Bible is a metaphor. Jesus went up to the highest part of his consciousness, and in that experience he was one with God. And as he was praying, his face began to shine, and his clothes became dazzling white and blazed with light. And then two men appeared and began talking with him, Moses and Elijah. Well, how could that possibly be? Moses and Elijah had stepped out of their bodies a couple thousand years before. Do you believe it's possible for that to happen? Do you? Well, if you believe it's possible for that to happen, you believe it's possible, ultimately, for you to walk right through that wall, don't you? Or do you? What do you believe? If it's possible for this to have happened, then this means that you are a very remarkable being, doesn't it? Because what we're looking at here is the prototype or the example of the kind of person that we all are. Every one of us has the ability to transcend our normalcy, and I know that you believe it if you've seen Star Wars and you've seen and nodded your head and all the wonderful things that happened there, and you know how possible that is. You could not believe it's possible unless that you also saw that it's possible for you. They were splendid in appearance, glorious to see, and they were speaking of his death at Jerusalem to be carried out in accordance with God's plan. Peter and the others had been very drowsy and had fallen asleep. Well, Peter and the others represent you and me in our ordinary human consciousness. We're very drowsy and we've fallen asleep and we don't know what's going on around us, and we can only see as through a glass darkly, as Paul said. Now suppose that at this moment there should suddenly appear right here in front of us three beings suddenly beginning to... How is it that they do in the Starship Enterprise when they start to be beamed up? Energized? Okay. Have you seen them begin to become beamed up and they begin to appear? Suppose that happened right now. What would you do? Let's see what Peter and James and John did. They woke up. I'll bet you'd wake up too, wouldn't you? And I will bet when you woke up that it would be an incredible experience that you would have. I'll bet that the energy and the power that you felt from those beings would help to imprint itself upon your mind. You'd say, what an incredible universe this is. But you don't have to stretch your imagination that far to have a similar example. You know someone, see them from time to time, and when they walk into your presence, you wake up. Their joy awakens you. Something about the excitement that they have for their life awakens them. It happened to me today. There's a person that I know who is one of the former world champion critics that I have known. He's one of those persons who never found anyone or anything right, and if you knew him long enough, you'd lose some skin. He would make you pay for knowing him. And I've watched this person change. As his thoughts have changed, so has his life changed. He got out of his car, parking lot today, and he didn't know that I was watching him. And he was enjoying himself so much he could hardly stand it. And he came inside, and he was just sort of jogging along inside and having fun. And that's the way he is every time I see him. And I waved him into my office, and I told him how much I started to tell him how much he meant to me. But before I could tell him, he began to tell me what a wonderful person I am and how much I have changed his life. Well, how does that make you feel when someone gives you a report like that? We just stood there enjoying each other and feeling the empowerment that comes from that kind of thinking when it is shared. Paul said in Romans, don't copy the behavior and customs of the world. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may prove what is the will of God and what is good and acceptable and perfect. Unless this ability to be transformed existed in us, it could not happen. And unless we had the capability of experiencing it, it would not be presented to us as an ideal. And nothing in your life will ever make complete sense until, number one, you begin to believe that there is a super mind, something greater than you, in you. And number two, until you begin to seek it with all your heart. If you seek it with all your heart, you will find it. Why? Because it will find you. You cannot miss it. It will not let you go. You were created to have this experience because this is the most natural of all experiences. And this is what the great teachers and writers, what the mystics have been reporting to us for generations. It's the secret hid for ages and generations. Christ, or this higher self in you, your hope of glory. It's our salvation. Do you know what the salvation for an acorn is? It's not to be eaten by a squirrel. The salvation for an acorn is to become an oak tree, isn't it? But do you believe that an acorn believes that? Do you think that an acorn for one moment thinks that it has inside itself an oak tree? I'll guarantee you that it does not. And you get a bunch of acorns together, and if you could hear their conversation, they would say, they would be very critical of one of those things and would with great resistance avoid any kind of change because they believe that they are all there is. Right? Well, in nature, do you know how acorns become oak trees. Squirrels make it happen. Isn't that true? You ever been out in the woods or out in the park and you see a squirrel pick up an acorn and, he'll eat a few, but then he'll take a few and he'll dig a little hole and put it in the ground. Isn't that right? Do you know that's what happens to you and me? You know all those squirrels you've had in your life, all those squirrely people? You know all those holes you've gotten yourself into? And all those problems that you could not bear because they should not have happened to a wonderful person like you? The darkness that came over you when you were so covered up with guilt and fear and anxiety and worry that you couldn't bear it. You thought, I'll never find my way to the light. That was the very moment that you began to grow again. Well, we're a lot like acorns and squirrels and oaks. But for you and me, there is one exception, and that is that we cannot grow beyond where we are unless we have a system. And we have that system, and it's called the transforming system. And that's what I want to be talking to you about in these next lessons. And more than talk about, I want us to experience the principles of the technique so that we will begin to grow. But not just grow a little bit like the changes that come when we move the furniture around the room. I'm talking about transformation. I'm talking about at depth. I'm talking about beginning a movement that will be with us for the rest of this life and long beyond this time. I'm talking about the extreme satisfaction that begins to come to us when we step forward into the fulfillment of our destiny. There's nothing like it. Richard Maurice Buck, who wrote Cosmic Consciousness, was a psychiatrist at the turn of the century, had an experience one night in which he said, all at once, without warning of any kind, I found myself wrapped in a flame-colored cloud. For an instant I thought of fire, an immense conflagration somewhere close in the great city. Next I knew that the fire was within myself. Directly afterward there came upon me a sense of exaltation, of immense joyousness, accompanied or immediately followed by an intellectual illumination impossible to describe. Among other things, I did not merely come to believe, but I saw that the universe is not composed of dead matter, but is on the contrary, a living presence. I became conscious in myself of eternal life. It was not a conviction that I would have eternal life, but a consciousness that I possessed eternal life at every moment. Maslow, great thinker of our time, talks about this infinite intelligence that is not only in us, but that we are. And he tells us of peak experiences, but more than that, he says that each one of us is potentially a peak performer, an incredible being, undiscovered power. Do you believe it? Of course you do. You are God's ideal, whose time has come. And when an idea is empowered from on high, it will grow and change, and transform the world. Believe it and seek it with all your heart. So it is.
To continue this presentation, please fast forward to the end and turn the tape over for proper cueing of side 2.